this. I got to give this another listen again. And I was thinking like you should upload it to YouTube and just have it on there.
Well, I have it on the Spreaker page. It's up there.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
So people can listen.
Yeah, I wanted to show it to my girlfriend and watch her think of me as an even bigger nerd than I already am. But yeah, that was fun. And I always thought of what you would do as a follow-up. So like what if you could choose one Avengers story, or it doesn't even have to be an Avengers story, what would you choose as a follow-up if you could? Which you absolutely should do and absolutely have me in.
Civil War would be really fun.
Yeah.
Even though it's many years old, but I mean, that would be awesome to do that. Yeah. Or even maybe Secret Invasion. That's really expansive. That's really expansive. I mean, there's another one too that Virtue and Vice, which has the JLA and the JSA.
Yeah.
And I think Goyer did co-write that with Jeff Johns or something like that.
Yep.
That is awesome.
What's that?
That's an awesome story. I mean, you got the whole JLA and the whole GSA. Oh, come on, man.
Yeah.
That would be really expansive.
I had an idea for a podcast series, very much so DC Comics related, and but then I'm thinking like, well, I couldn't use the characters because obviously they're owned by Warner Brothers and DC, so it's like I couldn't do it. But it's I was very much inspired by the project you did with that.
Yeah, I mean, well, you posted as a kind of like a podcast, and you kind of have some liberties with music, because obviously I use background music from movies and regular songs for that, and never heard anything yet, but hopefully I'm not outing myself. I don't know if Marvel comes a calling. I'm like, well, I just did it for fun. I'm not trying to sell it or anything. Put in those disclaimers.
Yeah, this is a passion thing. It's not about making money.
So obviously Halloween has had a big influence on you. Hence the book that just dropped. People. A horror anthology about love, loss, and things that go bump in the night. First off, why that title?
Oh, cool. Nobody's ever asked that. I think because like the prevailing theme of this particular collection of stories is feelings and emotions and very human things. I wanted to kind of talk about the idea of like, well, this isn't so much about monsters and this isn't about like horrific situations. This is literally just about these people and how they deal with these situations. Like horror to me, and all the best like Twilight Zone episodes and stuff like that, takes people that we can all relate to and puts them in scenarios that seem bananas, seem completely insane. Like you can look at The Sixth Sense, or you can look at The Exorcist. It's a child dealing with possession of the devil, like perfectly normal kid. And that's what makes it so exciting. It's less exciting when it's like, oh, I'm a demon hunter going after these blah, blah, blah. Like, all right, cool, that's fine. But that doesn't interest me. So it's more about these perfectly normal people and these things that happen to them. And that's why I wanted to go with the title People and talk about, and give it the subtitle telling you what everything's about. It's, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. There's a lot of stuff about my dad in there. There's a lot of stuff about how I've felt about dealing with issues for a long time, and a lot of love in there too. That was the most surprising part, I think, is channeling like the idea of love and romance and putting it in a horror context.
What made you decide now was the time to write this anthology?
I didn't have these stories in me before. I mean, I had the stories in me, but I didn't have the drive and the desire to write them until my dad passed away. Mm-hmm. So it's the double-edged sword of I wish he was here to see the book. Mm. But I couldn't have written the book having not gone through what I went through with him passing. So it sucks, and I've talked about it in therapy a bit, and my therapist is very understanding, and he kind of puts it in the context that it's important to exercise one's demons in one way or another, and in doing so through writing a book or writing a bunch of short stories, whatever the case may be, it's a form of therapy. So for me, it's about putting these feelings out there, and the feedback that I've gotten from people, especially when they read the story that's very much my dad and my experience with my dad, their response is, "Hey man, if you need to talk, I'm here," which is exactly the response that I was kind of thinking would happen. I wasn't hoping it would happen, but I was thinking that's what people are going to think when they read it. And so, yeah, I couldn't have done it without going through that awfulness of losing a parent. So to turn those feelings into something that hopefully will scare and entertain people is kind of nice, I guess.
All right. Why do an anthology instead of a single novel?
Well, that's good. I wanted to tell a bunch of different stories. I didn't want to lock myself down with one. I also wanted to train myself a little bit and kind of build the world that I would like to keep exploring. So the best way for me to do that was to tell a bunch of different stories that are loosely connected by either a region. In this case, they're all connected by the same region in sort of upstate New York area. But also I wanted to really explore a bunch of different concepts, whereas if I was locking myself in with one novel and one lengthier narrative, I would be stuck with just living in that one world. In this book, there is a novella. The whole thing opens with a novella, and that's about 40 pages, and then there's 10 more stories in there. Some are much shorter, and other ones are about 10 to 12 pages, whatever the case may be. But they're all in that same area, and they all play with the same kind of horror elements and fiction, but in a different way.
So we have the birth of the Ottone literary universe.
The OLU.
Yes. I like that. It just hit me. Rolled right up the tongue. Nice. I like that. How did you end up with these 11 stories? Were there more that you left out you might be saving for another time, or just say, okay, maybe I could do one more to add to this?
There was a 12th story that almost made it into this collection, and I had an editor, a friend of mine who is an editor for a company here on Long Island. He was my primary beta reader, and he was also my editor and formatter, and he did such an amazing job. Like, I'm indebted to him forever, and he has a credit on the book as well. He didn't want it, but I made sure he had it because it's important. But he felt, and I agreed when I read everything in context, that the 12th story just didn't fit. So that 12th story is going to be in the next book that I'm working on right now. But these stories tonally all had the same connective tissue of characters, like I said, going through something either extraordinary or something that was out of the ordinary, even just a tiny bit, or dealing with something in a different way. There's a story about a ghost, for example, that he's from the area in upstate New York. He dies in a foreign land, and he falls in love with someone. And over the course of 30 years of his afterlife, he really kind of is only just starting to figure out like who he is as a person and whether or not he can feel the things that he feels. And he learns to fall in love with someone, and this person is perfect for him in every way. But of course, she's alive and he's dead. So it's about that, them connecting, figuring out if there is a connection. So again, that's not like a traditional horror story, like, ooh, spooky dark house kind of thing. It's more about taking something that's horrific and kind of giving it a human touch.
Was that the aim of the anthology? Do you think that was something in the back of your mind while writing all the stories?
For sure. I think that putting a very human, very people-friendly approach to these horrific things was important. And I'm not big on gore. There's maybe one gory story in this, and that's more of like an action horror kind of thing, which I've gotten some lovely feedback on as well from an author that I really admire a lot. And that's really the only gory story there is. So I wasn't really interested in that kind of thing. I was more interested in like how people deal with horrific things. And again, that's deeply rooted in like the Twilight Zone and stuff like that. And that's sort of the approach that I was going for.
Which was the first story you wrote in the anthology?
I wrote one of them, or I started one of them about 2 years ago. No, it had to have been longer than that. It had to be about 4 years ago. Okay. And it came to me in a dream. And it was very much about a friend of mine. He and I were hanging out late one night watching movies and TV shows and stuff. I think we were watching like documentaries or whatever. And it was about a guy who is killed by animals in the woods or whatever. And I said to him, we probably had a few drinks and some cigars in us at that point. I said, hey man, if you were ever killed by a shark, I would make it my life's mission to kill that shark to get revenge for you, bro. Some totally stupid thing. And then I had a dream where he was killed by a bear. And I woke up, it was like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I just started writing that story down, the dream that I had. And that turned into one of the stories that's in the book. It's called Bare Hands. And it's about two friends. One of them is killed by a bear, and the other one decides to go out into the woods to take on this creature, and it almost has a supernatural element to it.
Nice one. Which of the stories was your most challenging to write?
Probably the novella was the most challenging to write, because I outline typically before I write. Like I have just, even if it's just little beats that I want to hit in a story, so I have these things written down. But with the novella, I kept having ideas, and some of them just had to go, because if I just kept going with it, it would have turned into the whole book. And it's like, this will maybe work in another story, or this will work here, or this will work there. So the novella was the hardest, just because there was so much that I had that I wanted to put into it that I took out. And I think after I obviously took those things out, I think the story is a lot stronger than if I just threw everything, including the kitchen sink, into it. But that was the hardest one for sure.
How long do you think it took for you to write it and get it all together?
The novella I wrote in about 3 days.
Okay.
3 days. It's about 40 pages. It took about 3 days to write. I was actually house sitting at a friend's house and puppy sitting. And so I had an ocean of time to play with. So I had my laptop, and I just wrote for hours and hours and hours. And it wrote itself, because my friend's house is the house that's in the story.
Well, that's the first book, right?
Yeah, the novella, and it just worked out. And my friend made the joke. He was like, I should get 1/11 of the proceeds of the book, because it is my house. And I was like, all right, fair enough. So, but yeah, that one kind of came out really easily. But again, going back, and like, as an author, you're your own worst editor in a lot of ways, because you go back and you look at something and you're like, man, I could put one more thing in there, or I could put a little bit more. And it's like, no, dude, like, just let it sit, let it live. Like, do your own thing, move on to the next story. So I'm learning as I'm going to, like, less is more. Don't throw everything in there. Save some stuff. You might need it later. Yeah.
I like that one. Now let's get into your writing process. I don't know if it's the same for the book or for other things you've done. Do you need to write at a certain time of day? Do you block out certain hours to do it? Is it pen and paper or keyboard or both?
It's kind of a mix. I keep the notebook in my phone. I also will jot down an idea if it hits me and I don't have, the phone nearby or whatever. But I like to write in the day. I'm no good at night. I feel I love the time, but I'd rather watch a movie and go to bed. Like that's more my speed. Maybe if